Welcome to a very special 100th edition of my Components Breakdown video review series. Today I have the distinct honor of showcasing the newest release to one of the most historic and beloved collectible card games of all time, known simply as Legend of the Five Rings. Legend of the Five Rings is centered around the 9 warring clans of the fictional Asian empire of Rokugan, and was originally released in 1995 and has become a staple of the genre due to its deep and evolving story. One of the most notable features of the game has been that players and winners of major tournaments throughout the years have been given the opportunity by the designers themselves to make pivotal decisions in its storyline that have influenced the game's development and sustained one of the most long-lived and devoted communities of gamers around. The War of Honor box game is the newest entry into this incredibly lush setting and provides a really solid entry point for new players of the series by simplifying the game's rules and including 4 pre-constructed game-ready decks, as well as officially standardizing its multiplayer mechanics. Now, many gamers at this point have already played Legend of the Five Rings and are familiar with the rules. However, there are 2 new things that differentiate War of Honor from its predecessor, and we will discuss each of these as we get a little further into this video. But it needs to be noted now that each card and mechanic in this box set is fully compatible with all pre-existing cards in the series. For those of you who are fans of my video review series, this game is quite unlike the typical board games that I usually cover, where almost everything in the games are self-contained inside of a single box. Now, War of Honor has that same aspect, meaning that you have everything you could possibly need to play the game effectively pre-included inside. However, due to the very nature of this style of game and the genre itself, players are encouraged to grow their collections and clans beyond the confines of the 4 pre-constructed decks that are included, meaning that new strategies and ideas are continually brought into the game as players purchase and learn more of its cards and the abilities that they encompass. Having said that, there is still a very simple turn structure to follow in this game that will lead players through each of their phases. However, there are hundreds, if not thousands of combinations and outcomes of a single game that make it nearly impossible to properly structure each circumstance in my typical video format. And because of this, I'm going to dedicate the majority of my time here to just overviewing the structure of the gameplay and how the game flows for those who have never played Legend of the Five Rings before. And by doing this, I think I will better illustrate why this particular release might just be the entry point to the series that you are looking for in particular. So let's go ahead and start off by looking at the game's components. War of Honor uses decks of cards from 4 very specific clans within Legend of the Five Rings, with each of the clans having their own inherent strengths and weaknesses. Now, despite being a collectible card game by nature, War of Honor is a completely self-contained gaming experience that can be expanded upon, but only if players so wish to do so. For those who are unfamiliar with the game already, each of the 4 80-card decks that are included are actually divided into 2 equal decks of 40 cards each that a single player will use, with each deck representing a different part of a player's managed resources. Now, each of the cards in a deck have either a black or green backing denoting which of the 2 decks they belong to, being either Dynasty or Fate. These 2 decks of cards should never be shuffled together and represent 2 completely unique portions of the game that a player must manage during each of their turns. As I previously mentioned, 2 new things make War of Honor completely different from the original collectible card game. One of the most notable differences are that players will control fortresses that are represented by a set of tiles, which give them additional abilities within the game that are usually unique to each of the factions, as well as playing an important role in how multiplayer combat is conducted. These fortresses will now have a vital role in the new official multiplayer rules. So in addition to including a set of fortresses for each of the 4 clans that are included inside the box, AEG has also decided to include a set for each of the game's other 5 clans. Now, in addition to these tiles, each of the 9 clans likewise has a set of 16 clan markers that are going to be used to track various abilities and conditions throughout the game, including one's dishonor and honor. Another change that comes with the release of War of Honor is how victory conditions are actually tracked within the game, with players winning by achieving goals that advance them along one of the 4 different paths to victory, which can be found on the included Paths to Victory scoreboard. Let's now take a look at the game's setup and give you a very brief overview of how the game works. In War of Honor, players are given two separate decks that will make up their individual clan. One of these decks is called the Dynasty deck, which will contain the players' personalities, their holdings, and the events that are part of their unique clan. These cards will interplay into one of the 4 provinces that are in front of that player, with each space holding only one card per province, until that card is either purchased or put into the play area, or in the case of events, resolve. Now, the Dynasty deck is really the driving force behind each player's strategy, as it holds the majority of a player's specific cards that are unique to that clan, most specifically the heroes that will play a vital part in obtaining the appropriate victory conditions for them. The Fate deck, on the other hand, is made up of a number of tactical cards that include the equipment, the followers, the spells, as well as the 5 rings themselves that are drawn into a player's hand and can be used at the appropriate times for various strategic purposes, which usually come in the form of a battle. Now, to set up the game, each player will pick a clan of their choice and shuffle each of their 2 decks individually, making 2 stacks that are about a foot apart from one another. Players will next place the Stronghold that is unique to their faction directly above their Dynasty deck, along with one special holding card that is titled Border Keep. These 2 cards will provide both the strengths of their provinces during battle, while also providing them with ways in which to generate gold right from the start of the game. Players will next need to create their provinces by taking the top 4 cards of their Dynasty deck and laying them face down from left to right between their 2 decks. Essentially, these cards mark each player's provinces or areas of lands that each clan controls. If at any time any of these provinces are without a card, it will immediately get refilled with another face-down card from the top of the Dynasty deck. Players will then place their 5 tiles, one at a time, in turn order around the capital city tile of Toshi Ranbo. Now, 3 of the players' 5 tiles are going to represent fortresses from which players can launch their attacks against another player, as well as providing additional abilities to those clans during very specific phases of a turn. In terms of actual gameplay, though, the initial placement of these tiles really don't play a major factor in the game, other than dictating who can participate in multiplayer combat both as an offensive and as a defensive ally. Finally, each player will draw 6 cards from the top of their deck to form their starting hand. A player's turn consists of 7 total phases, and instead of going into each one in detail, let me show you a quick sample of a typical player's sequence of play. Right now I'm about 3 turns into a game, and in front of me I have the Scorpion clan. My first action is going to be to straighten all my cards that were bowed or used on the previous turn. Next, I turn over each card in my province that started the turn face down, enacting any of the events that happen to turn up. Now, once again, these cards that are in my province are simply static representations of heroes and lands that are not yet in play but can be purchased on a future round. It's actually kind of like seeing what you can do from a very short list of available options. Next, I can partake in any number of actions from any of my existing cards and tiles that are in play, as well as cards that I have in hand, as long as those requirements are fully met. This is a very interesting part of the game, since actions come in 2 different forms, being both limited and open actions. Limited actions can only be done on a player's turn, while open actions can be done on any player's turn. So each player, despite whose turn it actually is, will be able to take open actions in the turn order as they see fit, with the caveat being that the active player is the only one who can also take limited actions that are available to them. Next, the active player may send any of their units that they control into battle against another player. Now, they may send all of their units against one province or split them up against multiple different provinces. Now, there are a lot of technical things that happen within a battle, but the overall goal for a player is to gain victory conditions and, if able to do so, destroy one of the player's provinces in the process. After each battle has fully resolved, the active player will then take what is known as the Dynasty phase, where they may now pay for and bring into play any of the personalities and holdings that were previously face-up within their provinces. This step is usually done by players using or, again, bowing their stronghold and other holdings within their play area that provide an adequate amount of gold for each of the cards that they wish to purchase. Next, the player will draw 1 card from the top of the Fate deck, making sure to discard down to the maximum hand size of 8 total cards. Now, throughout the game, players will continually utilize their available samurai, their shugenja, their ninjas, and other personalities in order to win via one of 4 victory conditions that are in War of Honor, and it is during this final phase that each of the players in turn order will determine if any of these step-by-step goals have been accomplished during that player's turn. Now, these 4 victory conditions in the game are marked on the Path to Victory scoreboard and include military, enlightenment, honor, and dishonor, and each play a very integral part of a clan's inherent abilities and strategies in the game. Legend of the Five Rings is really like most other CCGs in the market for the simple fact that what you decide to put into the game is almost always what you get out of it in the end. Even from this small base set, though, it remains a very involving game, as well as a constantly evolving one, where players really are rewarded for their creativity and their ability to adapt to their opponent's strategies. Now, the great thing about War of Honor is that it's given me the opportunity to revisit a game that I personally haven't played in at least 8 years or so. In fact, I really haven't played any CCGs in that time frame at all, which is really a shame since these types of games are such great avenues for creative thinking that you usually can't find inside of the standard, more structured board games that I review. And players who best know their decks and their inherent abilities are almost always going to win, which is definitely my type of game. Now, we've had the chance to play this about a half a dozen times now, which to me is really a lot and indicative to how much we've really enjoyed the game so far, and finding new combinations and ways of winning. But I can also say that like most CCGs, the learning curve is a little on the steep side, which is mostly due to the abilities on the cards not being fully understood by a group, as well as just the overall sheer abundance of options that you have available to you really on any given turn. And there is a lot to initially take in and digest because there are 40 cards in each of the players' 2 decks, which comes out to be about 25 or so unique cards in total that players will need to comprehend for each of the 4 different clans. Players might also find the game to be a little bit on the lengthy side for their taste, as we found the typical 2-player games for us took about an hour on average to complete, and 3 to 4-player games taking upwards of 75 to 90 minutes or more, making it definitely one of the more lengthy CCGs that I can remember playing. However, once we understood the mechanics and the flow of the game, and especially all the abilities of the cards, it became very intuitive and our steps became much faster, which allowed all of us to really become enwrapped in the game's theme, which is really prevalent in everything about the game, including the most obvious being its incredible artwork, but also the game's mechanics like the Stronghold and the provinces and the bowing and the honorable and dishonorable statuses, all of which make perfect sense and fit the game's mood very well. Also, all 4 clans that are included are incredibly unique of one another and really favor different aspects of the game, which we found to be a huge draw. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the other 5 clans play in comparison to those that were pre-constructed and included. All in all, though, War of Honor accomplishes exactly what I thought it would by introducing the game in a much simpler package, with the draw being that you don't have to invest a lot of money to play what is already considered to be an incredibly solid and enjoyable CCG with an incredible theme. There's a lot of mileage inside this game alone, and even after a half dozen plays, we barely felt like we've scratched the surface with the 4 pre-constructed decks. So players who are fearful of collectible card games and that aspect of the genre really should take notice here, because there is a lot here to keep you satisfied for some time to come. So that is War of Honor. I am Jeremy Salinas, and thank you very much for watching this 100th episode of my Components Breakdown video review series.